Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 4 of The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we discuss business agility through customer experience, employee experience, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed on this show, you can go to my website at gregkihlstrom.com and read my latest articles or get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile Brand podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the power of customer communities to drive great CX for everyone. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jake Randall, COO of Common Room. Jake, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking with you. So why don't we start by you giving a little background on yourself as well as what you're currently doing at Common Room?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I guess Common Room is my third startup here. I did a healthcare startup and then spent the last 10 years of my career at Okta. So I think most people are now familiar with Okta, but it's a cloud security platform. So I was fortunate enough to join them when they were about 30 people and no revenue, and then left, I guess, end of this past year when they were, I'll say, bigger.
Wow, that's some big growth there. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was great. And I did a lot of different things over my time there, but ended up in my final role running go-to-market for one of our 2 main product lines, which was a developer-focused product line, right? So working with the developers of an organization, selling into their CTO or CIO, depending upon where those folks sat, to provide what we called a customer identity and access management solution. So it's basically how you log in to an app, so that front-end user registration. So a lot of customer experience aspects there. And the big thing in that time at Okta, and particularly with this product line, was that what we were seeing was that the way that people were thinking about discovering technologies and the way that they were adopting those technologies was fundamentally changing. And that's not to say that that you're not going to have traditional marketing or salespeople out there, right. But instead, things are becoming much more digital. There's the rise of, I'm assuming people are hopefully familiar with the concept of developer relations role in a company. And so there's this real shift into the customer experience isn't about how you interact with, an individual person anymore at your vendor, but it's instead, how do you learn about what they're doing? How do you self-serve that information? How do you get comfortable with this being the right technology for you to use almost before you even talk to someone at that company? And developer relations fits into this broader concept of community, right? And how do you bring people together that have a similar view or a similar interest so they can share best practices and otherwise understand what that looks like? And so at Okta, the big problem I had was that no one understood really how to measure that, right? It was this fundamental growth engine for our business and how we thought about, all the great growth, I guess, that I got to experience, but no one could tell me how to do it. And so as I started talking to other companies, and there's, this is a very common problem. And so when I found Common Room, and I'm now the COO at Common Room as of the beginning of this year, that's basically what Common Room is trying to solve. So Common Room is an intelligent community growth platform. And our goal is to help you understand who are all these people that really deeply care about the problems you're trying to solve, but they're talking on, third-party or public forums, or they're tweeting about things, or there's LinkedIn posts, or there's podcasts about it, as it may be, And that is actually the driver of that end user adoption. That is the driver of how people are thinking about your business, and that you have to harness if you're going to achieve, basically great customer experiences first and foremost, which then ultimately leads into growth and, other KPIs that you want to go hit.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, that's a great intro and a great segue to kind of get started here talking about the value of building customer communities and how it benefits both business as well as benefits customers.
Yeah.
So look, why don't we start with a definition? You touched on this a little bit, but let's start with a definition here of what defines community. What is community from your standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'll say is, what it's not, maybe.
Sure.
So I think historically, particularly in kind of tech or any real kind of industry, communities have been, forums that you might go to or a bit more structured. Our view is that, and what all of our customers really see is that community is any way that your users interact with your brand and your product, right? And so is that encompassing of, as I said earlier, people that care about what you're doing, and how do they find information about you? How do they share their views? And most importantly, how do they interact with each other?
Yeah.
Right. And, I think the analogy I'll use here that helps a lot of people is that, I think we're all members of communities often in our personal lives, right? Maybe you're in a Facebook group. Or, I think, one that I always think is interesting is if you like to go out to eat, you might go on Yelp or other services like that. That's effectively a community where you're leveraging other people and their views and how many stars they might give something as an example to better understand the decisions that you want to make and how to think about where you want to go to dinner, right? As an example here.
Yeah.
But that same idea of how we all interact, I'll say, in our personal lives is more and more, for all the obvious reasons over the last couple of years that we all experienced, influencing how people are making decisions in their business life also, right?
That's great. Yeah, and I like the different examples there. So, although I'm sure, they can vary based on business and vary quite drastically, what defines a successful customer community?
Yeah, it's a great question. To your point, it varies a lot depending upon the business. I think the main thing I would focus on is how self-sustaining it is, right? So, and what I mean by that is, are people answering each other's questions? Because if it's just you as, I'll say, the vendor or the purveyor coming in and answering every, post that happens, then it's not really a community. It's more just, a place to go get help. Right. And a community, I think, again, if you just reflect on it in terms of how you might think about it in your personal life, what's powerful about the community is that you have a lot of people that have a similar interest, that, have perspectives that can be helpful to you and that want to share that opinion, and they want to be part of something with you. Right. And so the more that you can then focus on, is it self-sustaining? Are you getting responses from other members of your community? Is that community growing? Right. Yeah. All those aspects, that really starts to ultimately create a successful community. But I think more importantly, start to create that kind of flywheel effect you want to positively impact potentially other parts of your business that you might care about.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So, there's been communities created to various success by companies over the years, but, what are some of the aspects that maybe have been overlooked when creating them that you've identified and are providing solutions for?
There's, I think, a couple areas here. One is, as people have become more and more comfortable with multiple platforms, I'll call it. Right. So again, just to try to tie it in for everyone, I'm sure many folks that, you're on Twitter, you're on LinkedIn, you're in, various other forums, right? So the first thing is your community doesn't live in one place. And so we talk about, you have to go meet your users where they are. So if you're in a developer heavy, very kind of technical community, there's conversations happening in, Stack Exchange, on GitHub. They're tweeting about things. They're in Reddit, whatever it may be. And so I think the first thing that Common Room does that has been, beneficial to all of our customers is bring together all those sources so that your community, and then help you understand that this is Jake or this is Greg. And yeah, Jake and Greg might be having conversations across different places, but fundamentally it's not, random user handle this, right? Or username that. This is Greg. And this is what Greg, this is where Greg works. This is his relationship with us if you're a business, right? So he's got a subscription for X dollars or however you want to think about that. He's asking these questions across all these different platforms. And so now you have to really understand who your end users are and what they care about. And that hasn't been easy really for any community leader, right? Communities have been helpful for various reasons, as we've talked about, and there's been plenty of successful communities. But understanding really who someone is and that relationship with them has always been a big gap for community leadership.
Yeah.
And then once you establish that, the other thing that we do is we layer on, various natural language processing and AI and all those fancy buzzwords that, people talk about these days. But we actually do it, and it becomes really helpful because, for some of our communities, there's literally hundreds of thousands of activities in any given, day or week. And that's a lot of information that you've got to separate the signal from the noise. Right. Yeah. And so what are trending topics? What do people care about? What's the sentiment? Right. Is this person upset? Is this account generally upset? Right. These are all things that by bringing all the information together and aggregating it in a tool like Common Room, and then layering on, these various kind of services that we provide to that data, we can help you understand the key drivers of your community and where you need to take action.
Got it. Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit, but just talk specifically about how customer communities can enhance the customer experience. So how would you characterize the way that a successful customer community can enhance CX with a product or a service?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is really just getting people the answers they want more quickly. And what I mean by that is, right, like, I think hopefully people understand this, and hopefully people have all been members of communities, but rather than, I joke about this for a lot of our customers, their customers, they don't want to file a ticket with your support system, right? They want to go ask a question of the community, and then they're going to get, instead of getting an automated response for your ticketing process and getting, your support agent to call them back 24 hours later, they're going to have someone who's just like them that, has a similar role in a similar company or type company say, hey, I ran into the same problem. I tried XYZ. And then 5 minutes later, another person's going to say, oh, that's really interesting. I never tried that, but I tried ABC, right? And now you're actually engaging with, I'll say, your fellow practitioners to understand like what actually works. It's not the canned response. It's your peers, it's your community telling you, here's what you should go try, right? And so when you start thinking about like that as an end user, that's going to be a much better experience for you because you can either ask your question or often you can search questions that have already been asked, look at those answers, understand what's going on there. And so it really just becomes about faster time to value, faster realization of solutions for your problems. And I think probably most importantly, it creates relationships, right? And for a lot of communities that we support, they have meetups in the various large cities, and you start to build a network of folks that again care about, if you get back to what is a community, is people that are like, that care about similar things that you care about, that want to talk about that. And that all results in ultimately the community member being, better at their job or more successful in whatever they're trying to solve.
Nice. Yeah. And do you have an example that you could share of a customer community that enhanced?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, we're fortunate we work with a lot of great companies. I think you can go to our website and people can look at them, but probably one of my favorites is DBT Labs. So they're the maintainers of an open source tool. And so they have 24,000 data practitioners in their community, right? So a relatively large community, 24,000 people have said, hey, like I love thinking about how to transform and think about data. And so what we help DBT labs do is understand like who are their top advocates, right? So who are the people that are answering the most questions, they're being most helpful to their community so that they can find folks that are doing that and, and celebrate them and make sure they understand how much they approve it, or also find folks that are, on the cusp of that, if you will, right? And how do we help activate people so we get into that self-sustaining, successful community? But then we also go in and to the point of analyzing that data, we're able to say, these are the main topics and themes that are being talked about in your community. Here's things that have a positive sentiment, or here's topics that have a positive sentiment around it. Here's topics that have a negative sentiment around it. And so that lets us help DBT do then is they can go and, their product team can look at it and think about how do I create better product experiences, because the community is telling me that they're struggling here. So back to the customer experience standpoint, like one of the things I joke about is that in my time at Okta, we used to do customer advisory boards where you bring in 10 people that paid a lot of money essentially for your product, right?
Right.
But that's not really that effective. Don't you want to go, and I'll use a DBT example, don't you want to go and ask 24,000 people that have said, I love your product and I use it every day and I'm talking about it with my peers, ask them and understand from them what they care about? That's a much more authentic way to create better customer experiences, to create better customer value, and ultimately leverage that data to really, drive your business forward. Right. So that's, I think that's a great example of how a community, how a successful community and then the right tooling around it can create all these things that are both beneficial to your customers and to your business.
Yeah. That's great. And so, to that point, let's now, we focused a little more on CX. Now let's talk more about the benefit to business outcomes.
Yeah.
So, definitely I think there's a lot of obvious things like increased customer loyalty and everything certainly, falls in line. But, from your perspective, what are some of the other benefits that a successful customer community can gain at a business level?
Yeah. So one of the things that's fun about community and that I love about working in it every day is that it can really benefit, if you think about the whole customer life cycle, there are applications for, marketing, sales, customer success, right? All those areas. So one of the things that, we do with a lot of our customers, and actually Figma is a great example, just to give you one more example of a customer, is help them understand the impact of their community. So a little bit to your prior question, what's like in gaps in communities is people really understanding the impact that it can have has been a softer, I'll say, tool for a lot of companies. And so, that's a big part of what Common Room can provide. And so we're able to show that for many of our companies, or our customers, I should say, that a lot of their leads, essentially in the traditional marketing sense, actually originate in their community. So people are going to go and they're going to find the community, they're going to ask their question, they're going to try to understand, are there other people like me that are trying to solve a similar problem, and does this solution help me with it? And then once they feel comfortable with that and they're asking questions, then they'll go, maybe spin up a free trial or whatever that next step is. So we're able to show that there's massive lead kind of gen aspects for your business. And that also within that, we're able to show that once you bring them in, if they've been engaged in your community, they have faster time to close and higher average deal sizes, which makes sense if you think about it, right? Because you're like, okay, I've gotten a free reference almost, right? Yeah. If you think from my peers to say, this is the right solution for this, I'm able to self-serve back to the prior example I gave around kind of the support deflection almost use case there, right? Self-serve my answers. And so I don't need to talk to sales and marketing at your company. Right. I'm comfortable with this. I want to progress into being a paid customer. I don't need to negotiate. I don't need to spend much of time, right? And so you see companies, like Figma, and there's plenty of other companies, at Atlassian, Temporal is one of ours, where that community kind of flywheel, that end user flywheel effect that they're able to generate becomes a massive driver in efficiency for their customer acquisition funnel also.
Yeah, and so to follow on this, you definitely touched on this, but when thinking about our return on investment, then in this, what's a realistic way? Because I would imagine some of these organizations, like, they needed to build a community, and so day one they weren't necessarily massively increasing sales or lengthening life cycles or anything. So what's a good way to look at ROI when you're looking at customer communities?
Yeah, super interesting question. I kind of mentioned some of them, but we work with a lot of, I'll say, commercial open source companies. And if you look at, we could have a whole other podcast on what's going on in the markets, obviously, in the venture and all that. But, there's plenty of companies that have raised money around their community, quite frankly, right? And so I think that's not actually how you calculate ROI, but I think it speaks to how people are starting to understand the power and the relevance of a strong community. But when it comes to actually measuring the ROI of it, I think you end up often in areas that are closer probably to, like, if any of your listeners are familiar with, like, marketing attribution type concepts, right? But to use the example I was using previously, if we can go in and Common Room can show you that this number of leads are generating out of your community and that they're closing faster for larger ACV or average deal size, that starts getting, it actually becomes pretty easy to quantify it, right? You're like, hey, I'm spending, I've got this many people working on my community team, I'm paying some money for these tools, and I'm generating this many leads into our business, and I'm helping deals close faster. That's worth something to any business, right? And so I think that's one of the almost, back to, I think I mentioned that maybe community's been a little softer at times in the past. It's a myth, I guess, in my mind, where we're seeing more and more companies that have leveraged their community to basically A, create a business, and then B, drive a business, and then, and lastly, I guess C, we can actually quantify it, right? Because we can go and we can tell you all these metrics around how it's feeding your funnel or deflecting support cases or otherwise supporting these, I'll say, more traditional concepts of how you would run your go-to-market team.
Yeah. Well, and some of the customers that you mentioned, I mean, I not only am I familiar with the products, but I know of them as having strong communities. And so, whether you're early stage, and I mean, I agree with you. I think, at a certain stage in a startup, raising money is the ROI. And, as a company grows, obviously you need more paying customers and larger deal size and all that stuff as well, of course. But I think totally agree with everything you're saying. And, that's really interesting that, again, some of those companies you mentioned are ones that, again, from my perspective, I know of them, like Figma. I know there's a really strong community around it, and that's how it grew the way that it did.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're an amazing success story. Obviously, I mean, one of the things it's a public tweet, so I can talk, but like Dylan, their CEO, will, when he talks about Figma, he talks about their community. He doesn't say, hey, I want to thank our customers. He says, I want to thank our community. And I think that's a really great example of just that shift in mindset, right? And if you think about your customers not as customers, although I just use the phrase, but instead your community and the people that care about what you're doing and that it's really important to them and that they're not just a customer, but instead they're part of it, right? You're all part of one big community trying to create a better way to design, right? In the case of Figma, that's a really powerful shift in your thought process, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one last question before we wrap up here. For those that are maybe not quite as far along as Figma or some of the others that we mentioned, what's a piece of advice you'd have for a leader as they know they need to do something, but where do they get started with growing a customer community? Yeah,
no, it's a great question. I think there's a lot of ways to do it, and there's a lot of great, honestly, like free tools to do it, right? I mean, Twitter, Slack, there's all sorts of ways. I mean, lots of our kind of smaller companies, they have a Slack community, and it's free to get started. So it doesn't need to start as something that is this massive investment. But I think having the biggest thing I would say is have a really clear understanding as to what type of community you want to build. And I think the easiest way to think about it is, are you trying to build a customer community, or are you trying to build more of a practitioner, like thought leadership community, right? So And, and just quickly to give an example on that, some of our customers, their community is very much, these are our customers. It is a way for them to, ask support questions or things that are more in line with what being an actual customer would entail. And then there's other communities that are more around, hey, if you care about this topic, then come here and learn about it and we'll talk about it. And yeah, obviously there's a thought that over time you're going to eventually say, wow, this is a great community. And isn't it run by this company? And I should go check out this company. Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's that idea of, I think communities are a different way to think about some of the other marketing tools people are more familiar with, whether, writing blogs or SEO and that kind of stuff, right? Community is actually this very powerful way to go and get information and learn about a topic and build in turn your relevance to that topic, right? So that when people start thinking about, oh, I need something to help me with XYZ, they go to your brand, right? Because they've started to associate their community experience with how you can help them in that problem.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Jake, thanks so much for joining. For those listening, what's the best way for them to keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you can, follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the fun community things, or you can, check us out at commonroom.io. And we'd love to hear from you and look forward to hopefully supporting everyone who's interested in their community journey.
Wonderful. Well, again, I'd like to thank Jake Randall, COO of Common Room, for joining the show. Thanks for listening to The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom. Talk with you next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.theagilebrand.show. To get a copy of my latest book, Meaningful Measurement of the Customer Experience, visit my website at gregkihlstrom.com. Until next week, stay agile.